Imagine a winter forest at night. The snow crunches beneath your feet so loudly, as if the whole world is listening only to you. You are walking alone, and then you notice something strange. It is too quiet around you. No wind, no birds, not even the usual cracking of frozen trees. And then you hear footsteps, not behind you, not in front of you, everywhere at once. Something is moving between the trees, too fast, too lightly, too inhuman. You do not see it clearly, only a long shadow, a figure that is far too tall, and eyes that should not be glowing in the dark. And then you hear a voice, your own voice, calling your name from deep inside the forest. If you hear that, it is already too late to run. Because according to the legend, the Wendigo begins hunting long before you realize you have already become its prey. Among all the creatures in North American folklore, there is one that stands out, even against the darkest legends. It is not just a monster, not just a spirit of the forest, and not just a campfire story meant to frighten children. The Wendigo is the embodiment of hunger, a strange, insatiable, inhuman hunger, a hunger that never ends. This legend came from the stories of indigenous peoples of the northern forests of North America, especially in places where winter was never just a season, but a true test of survival. When the frost became severe, when food ran out, when a person was left alone with hunger, cold, and despair, the darkest stories were born. And one of them spoke of a creature that appears where a person crosses the final boundary, the boundary between a human being and something else, the boundary between survival and monstrosity. In the oldest stories, the Wendigo was not described as a cinematic monster, but as something even worse, a being that was once human, emaciated, tall, with unnaturally elongated limbs, with skin stretched over bone, and eyes where nothing human remained. Some said its heart had frozen long ago, others said its soul had been consumed by hunger, and sometimes people said the Wendigo could not even be called a living being in the ordinary sense. It was more like a curse that could enter a person if they allowed the darkness inside them to win. And that is what makes the legend so terrifying, because the Wendigo is not just a beast living somewhere far away in the woods. It is a reminder of what a human being can become when nothing remains inside them but hunger, fear, and the will to survive at any cost. To understand why the image of the Wendigo is so terrifying, you have to imagine life in the northern forests hundreds of years ago. No electricity, no roads, no communication, no way to get help quickly. Imagine a winter so long that the snow itself feels eternal. Food supplies run low, hunting becomes harder and harder. The cold sinks into the bones, people grow weaker, and hunger begins. It was in conditions like these that stories of the Wendigo were born. But these stories were not only frightening, they were warnings. A warning about what happens when a person gives in to greed, when they stop seeing limits, when hunger becomes more important than conscience, when everything human begins to disappear from within. In many old traditions, becoming a Wendigo was tied to the deepest moral collapse, to an act after which there was no road back. It was as if the person no longer belonged to the world of the living and became part of the dark forest, the cold, and the endless hunger. That is why the Wendigo is not just a monster in the woods. It is a symbol of insatiability, a symbol of what happens when the desire to take more than you need finally destroys the person themselves. And perhaps that is why the legend survived for centuries, because it does not speak only about a creature in the forest. It speaks about human nature, about how easy it is to lose yourself in the dark, and that the most terrifying monsters are not always born somewhere outside us, but within us. Today, most people imagine the Wendigo as a tall, thin creature with long arms, sharp bones, a hollow face, and sometimes even features that resemble a deer skull. That image became especially popular through movies, games, and internet horror stories. But the old legends make it even more terrifying, because in those stories, there is no need for a dramatic appearance. The horror there is built in a different way. The Wendigo is often described as being too tall to be human, too thin, as if its body were made of nothing but bones, tendons and skin. It moves suddenly, but almost without a sound. It can stand still so long that it seems to become part of the forest. And then, in less than a second, it is suddenly right beside you. Some stories say it smells of dampness, rot, cold, and the death of the winter forest. Others claim that near it, it does not simply get colder. The frost feels as if it enters you, even through warm clothing. There are legends where the Wendigo is barely visible at all. A person notices only a silhouette between the tree trunks, only impossibly long limbs, only the glint of eyes in the dark, only the feeling that something impossibly tall is looking down at you in a forest where no one should be. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes it so frightening. Because real fear is not born when you see the monster completely. It begins when your mind starts filling in the missing details. And in the case of the Wendigo, the mind almost always imagines something worse than what you could ever see with your own eyes. If you tried to reduce the entire image of the Wendigo to a single idea, that idea would be hunger. But not ordinary hunger that can be satisfied with food. This is hunger that becomes an essence, a condition, a curse. In the legends, the Wendigo almost always wants more. No matter how much it gets, it is never enough. It does not become full. It does not calm down. It does not stop. And that is where the true horror hides, because most monsters in stories want something. Territory, revenge, blood, souls. But the Wendigo has no final goal. It is hunger itself, an insatiability that only grows. The more it receives, the stronger the need becomes. And the farther it goes, the less human there is left inside it. And if you think about it, that makes the legend much deeper than an ordinary scary story. The Wendigo is frightening not only because it hunts, it is frightening because it represents something infinitely empty inside. A black hole that can never be filled. The open mouth of the winter forest that never closes. And perhaps that is why the image still works on people today. Because the fear of insatiability is not just an ancient fear of the past. It is a fear we still understand now. If the legends are to be believed, the Wendigo does not appear just anywhere. Its territory is the northern forest, deep winter, and empty places where a person arrives too late and too alone. This is not urban horror, not a haunted house, not a cursed doll hidden in an attic. It is a creature of cold and distance. Its true element is the snow-covered forest. A place where, between the trees, you cannot tell how far away a sound really is. Where footprints are quickly swallowed by snow. Where darkness arrives too early. Where you can keep walking for hours and still feel as if you have not moved at all. The Wendigo is especially terrifying here, because the forest itself begins to take its side. Snow muffles sound, but sometimes it makes the smallest noise feel unnaturally loud. The shadows of the trees start to look like figures. Branches crack like footsteps. The cold slows the body, and it slows the mind. And fear makes a person start making mistakes. And that is when the hunter gains its greatest advantage. The victim begins to frighten themselves before they ever see it. There are stories where the Wendigo appears in the middle of a blizzard. There are stories where it was seen at the edge of a camp, just beyond the light of the fire. And sometimes people said it had been following a person for a long time already. They simply noticed too late. Not when you finally see the figure, but when you realize you have been hearing one extra footstep beside your own for a very long time. The most terrifying part of the legend is not what the Wendigo looks like. It is the way it hunts. Because it does not always attack at once. In many stories, the Wendigo watches first. It moves alongside you. It does not reveal itself completely. It keeps its distance. as if it is testing whether its victim has noticed it yet. Sometimes it feels as if it lets you see it only out of the corner of your eye, just for a second, just one detail, a shadow between the trees, a figure that is far too tall, a pair of eyes reflecting light in the dark. That is enough. After that, a person can no longer feel safe. They begin to move faster, to look back, to make mistakes, to listen to every sound. That is exactly what the Wendigo wants. It wears you down. It does not always hunt with its body. Sometimes it hunts with fear. There are legends where the Wendigo mimics voices. It calls to a person in a familiar tone. It can sound like a friend, a relative, or someone you trust. The voice comes from the forest, from the dark, from the place you should never follow. And still, a person listens, because the sound feels too familiar. There are stories of people hearing their own name, quietly, calmly, as if someone were standing right behind them. But when they turned around, no one was there. The Wendigo does not always attack at once, because it knows the longer the hunt lasts, the weaker the victim becomes. The cold does its work. Panic drains strength. A person loses the trail, loses direction, and begins running into the part of the forest that only grows thicker. And only when the victim is exhausted, confused, and barely able to resist, the hunt comes to an end, very quickly, with almost no chance at all. If you gather the most common details from legends and modern horror stories, you get a terrifying set of signs that seem to say one thing: something is nearby. The first sign is unnatural silence. A forest should never be completely silent. But before the Wendigo appears, everything seems to freeze. The birds disappear. The animals make no sound. Even the wind seems quieter. The second sign is the feeling that something is watching you. Not ordinary fear, but an almost physical sense of someone else's gaze, as if something stands between the trees and patiently waits for you to make a mistake. The third sign is strange footprints. Sometimes they are too large. Sometimes they look human but unnaturally stretched. Sometimes the tracks simply stop, as if the creature no longer needed the ground. The fourth sign is sudden cold. Not the kind of cold the weather can explain, but a sharp, piercing frost that makes it hard to breathe. The fifth sign is sound. Footsteps where no one should be. Branches snapping at your side, even though you are sure everything ahead of you is clear. Or a voice. That same voice that sounds familiar and still fills you with immediate terror. And the worst part is the feeling that it is playing with you, that it is not merely nearby. It has already chosen you, and now it is only deciding when to end the hunt. Every great legend has a reason why it does not disappear. Stories of the Wendigo survived not because people simply liked frightening one another. They survived because the northern forest itself knows how to create horrors that are difficult to explain simply. People disappeared. Hunters did not return. Travelers lost their way even in places they thought they knew. Some found tracks they could not explain. Some heard voices in the forest and never forgot the sound for the rest of their lives. Of course, many things have rational explanations: cold, isolation, panic, hunger, hallucinations, mistakes of perception. But legends are not strongest when everything in them is proven. They are strongest when there is still room for doubt. That is why stories of the Wendigo did not die with the old world. They followed us into modern times. Now, people tell stories about strange figures seen near the road in winter, about a tall silhouette at the edge of the forest, about movement between the trees that is far too fast to feel natural, about a voice that called them toward a place they should never have entered. Maybe all of it is fear. Maybe it is imagination. Or maybe some legends survive because they contain a grain of something real. Not necessarily in a literal way, but in that deep, primal terror a person feels when they are alone in a winter forest at night. They are monsters that frighten people only on the screen. They may look impressive, but 5 minutes after the credits, they are already gone from your mind. With the Wendigo, it is different. It stays in memory because it is tied to several ancient human fears at once. First, there is the fear of being alone in the forest, a place where the human being is not the one in control, where they are weak, where knowledge, tools, and confidence can suddenly mean nothing at all. Second, there is the fear of being hunted by something smarter and more patient than you. Not a rabid animal, not a random threat, but by a creature that hunts with intention. Third, there is the fear of losing your human form, to lose your mind, your conscience, yourself. And finally, there is the fear of hunger. Not only physical hunger, but the hunger of inner emptiness, the kind of emptiness that nothing can ever fill. The Wendigo lives at the intersection of all these fears. That is why it does not feel like just another monster from a story, but like something ancient, cold, and uncomfortably close to the darkest part of the human mind. Imagine a person who decides to take a shortcut through the forest, or a group that realizes too late they have lost the trail, or a lone hunter who stayed out until dark. At first, nothing happens. Just an ordinary winter forest. Just snow. Just trees. Then the person notices they are looking back far too often, for no clear reason, only because a feeling begins to rise inside. Something is wrong. Then they hear a sound to the right. They stop. Silence. They keep walking. A minute later, the same sound comes from the left. He freezes again. Too far away to be a person. Too fast to be an ordinary animal. Then he sees the tracks. At first, they look like boot prints, but they are too long, too deep, and the distance between them is too great, as if something with an impossible stride had been moving beside him. He starts walking faster. That is exactly what it wants. Now his breathing grows louder. His heart pounds harder. His thoughts begin to blur. He no longer watches for landmarks. He no longer tracks his direction. He is thinking of only one thing now, to get farther away. And in that moment, the forest becomes a trap. Because the Wendigo does not have to be faster in a direct chase. It is more terrifying because it can make the victim run toward the place where there is no escape. The most terrifying part of the Wendigo legend is not only the chase, but what comes after. In many horror stories, after the encounter, too little remains, as if the person simply disappeared from the world. The forest knows how to hide everything. Snow buries the trail, wind erases the prints, and the cold preserves the silence. That is why so many Wendigo stories end not with a discovery, but with an absence. No body, no clear answer, no final point that explains everything. Only an abandoned backpack. Only tracks leading deeper into the trees. Only a broken branch far too high for a person to have touched. Only a place no one wants to return to a second time. Some said the Wendigo drags its prey to where the forest becomes almost impassable, into ravines hidden beneath snow, into the depths of old black spruce woods, to places where it is dark even during the day, to places where the sound of roads, human voices, and the normal world never reaches. And that is where the deeper horror lies, because the victim does not vanish only in a physical sense. It is as if they become part of the forest itself, part of that winter darkness from which no one can truly be brought back. Now imagine the final scene. Late in the evening, a young man is walking back to his car along a forest road after hunting. The beam of his flashlight catches the snow, the trees, and the steam of his breath. The car is only minutes away. He is almost relaxed when he hears someone call his name. The voice comes from ahead, quiet, almost calm. He stops, Silence again. Then the same voice speaks again, this time behind him. He spins around, sweeping the flashlight between the trees. No one. Only snow. Only shadows. Only forest. He tells himself it was an echo, that he is tired, that he only imagined it. A few steps later, he notices tracks near the trail. They are fresh, but strange. Too long, too far apart, as if something huge had been walking beside him, carefully staying just outside the light. The man starts walking faster. The voice comes again, now from the left, and this time it is not just his name. It is a cry for help. A woman's voice, breaking, frightened, from the darkness between the trees. He freezes. Logic tells him not to turn, not to leave the road, not to follow the sound. But the cry comes again, and there is something too human in it to simply walk away. He takes a few steps into the trees. The snow is deeper here. Branches catch at his clothes. The flashlight shakes in his hand. The voice sounds closer now, almost near. And then, silence. He slowly lifts the light higher and sees a figure between the trees. Very tall, motionless, far too thin, with arms longer than any living thing should have. The flashlight jerks. The beam slips away for a second, and when it returns, the figure is closer. Too close. He breaks into a run, back toward the road. But the worst part begins then, because while he runs, he hears footsteps not behind him, but beside him. Left, then right, then left again, as if the creature is not chasing him, but escorting him, playing, waiting. He bursts onto the road, sees the car ahead, almost believes he is safe, and then realizes it is farther away now. He stops, not understanding how. He looks back. The road is gone. Only forest remains. Then the voice calls his name again, this time from above. He raises his head and sees it. The creature is perched on a bent trunk above him, unnaturally hunched, almost fused with the tree. Its eyes reflect the light. Its head tilts, as if it is studying its prey. And then it smiles. Not like a human. Too wide, too calm. The flashlight falls into the snow. Its beam spins, breaking the forest into shadows. A sharp crack of branches. One short scream. And silence again. The next morning, the rangers find only tracks. One human trail leading into the trees, and beside it, others. Too long, too far apart, and so deep it seems something immensely heavy walked through the snow. But 20 meters later, they vanish too, as if the forest took everything, as if no one had ever been there at all. And perhaps that is the most terrifying part of the Wendigo legend. Once it has taken your trail, the forest is no longer on your side. Because the Wendigo does not simply kill. It takes a person to the place where all hope ends. To the place where the cold is stronger than memory. To the place where the victim's name can still be heard for a little while between the trees. To lure the next one in. So who is the Wendigo, really? An ancient creature of the northern forest? A spirit of hunger? A curse? A warning? Or a reflection of that part of human nature we prefer not to think about? Maybe that is exactly why this legend never dies. Because the Wendigo is not terrifying only because of how it looks. It is terrifying because it is tied to the oldest human fears. Cold, loneliness, hunger, darkness, and something that may be walking behind you between the trees while you are still trying to convince yourself that no one is there. And if one winter night in the forest you hear a voice calling your name, The most frightening part may not be whether you answer, but in the fact that it already knows where you are.